38 years. That's how long I'd been married to her when I learned, standing in the dark behind a row of wine racks at the Briarcliff Country Club, that she had already chosen the man who would replace me. Not divorce me, not leave me, replace me, like a worn-out chair in a house she still wanted to live in. The bartender, a quiet old man named Ezra Volkov, who'd worked that club longer than most of its members had been alive, was the one who put his hand on my elbow when I walked in. I'd come early to surprise my wife. We were having our anniversary dinner there that Saturday, and I wanted to confirm the wine. That was all. A bottle of the 1996 kindest. My wife always said she liked, though I'd come to suspect she only said it because I did. Ezra knew me. He'd poured my drinks for the better part of 2 decades. He looked at me that afternoon, the way a doctor looks at you before he tells you something nobody wants to hear. "Mr. Ashworth," he said low, "don't go to the bar, walk with me. Now, I'm 63 years old. I've negotiated leverage buyouts and sat across from men who held the lives of 2,000 employees in their hands. I know when a voice is telling me something deeper than its words." I followed him. He led me through the service hall behind the dining room, past the kitchen, into a little wine storage alcove where they kept the reserve bottles. There was a vent in the wall, a square brass grate the size of a paperback, and through it you could hear the lounge bar on the other side as if you were standing inside it. I don't know why he brought me there. I don't know what made him do it. I haven't asked him even now, because I think the answer might break something in me. "I don't want broken yet," he whispered. "Stand right here. Don't speak. Don't move. Listen until they're gone." And then he left me alone with the grate. The first voice I heard was hers, my wife. Her name is Helene, and I have heard that voice for 38 years, over breakfast, in hospital rooms when our daughter was born, on the phone when her mother died, whispering against my shoulder in the dark of our bedroom on 1,000 ordinary nights. I'd know it underwater. I'd know it on the moon. She was laughing. "He still thinks the doctor is on his side," she said. "He really does. It's almost sad." "Don't," another voice said. A man's voice said. A man's voice, smooth, lower, the kind of voice that's been trained on conference calls. "Don't get cocky. He's not stupid. He's slipping," she said. "You've seen him. He forgot the trip to Charleston. He forgot Margot's husband's name twice in one dinner. The diagnosis won't even need to be exaggerated." "It does need to be," the man said. "Mild cognitive impairment isn't enough. We need something the board will act on. Early-stage dementia with a clear trajectory. That's what triggers the trust language. And Pell will write whatever we tell him to write. Pell will write what the file supports. Don't say anything you don't want repeated." A pause. The clink of a glass. She said, "How long? 60 days, maybe 90. After the anniversary party, we let things settle. He won't see it coming. He never sees anything coming." I want to tell you what that did to me, standing there in the dim light with my hand flat against a wooden wine crate, but I don't have language clean enough for it. There is no English word for the moment your life splits in two and you watch the second life walk off without you. The closest I can come is to say that something in my chest went very quiet, not loud, not breaking, just quiet. Like the moment after a heavy door closes and you realize you're alone on the wrong side of it. The man's voice again. "And the daughter? Margot will side with me. She always does. She thinks her father is sweet, but she thinks he's old. She'll sign whatever the lawyers put in front of her if I'm crying when I hand her the pen." I had to put my hand against the wall to stay upright. "And you're sure about us?" he said. "Quieter now. After, when this is done." "I've been sure for 2 years," she said. "I just had to wait until the company was worth enough to be worth the trouble." That was when I learned that my wife's lover was discussing my net worth. I don't remember walking out of that alcove. I remember Ezra's hand on my back at some point, and I remember the parking lot, and I remember sitting in my car for what must have been an hour because the sun moved across the dashboard and I watched it move, and I didn't blink. My hands were on the steering wheel. My wedding ring caught the light. I looked at it the way you look at a stranger's hand sewn onto your own arm. I drove home. She was already there. She was in the kitchen with a glass of white wine, scrolling her phone, humming. She looked up and smiled at me, and the smile was the same smile I'd been kissing for 38 years, and I smiled back and I said, "Hey, sweetheart, long day?" And she said, "Long enough. How was the club? I said. Forgot to stop by, actually. Got tied up at the office. I'll go tomorrow. She nodded, already back to her phone. She didn't even look up to see if my face matched my voice. That, more than anything, told me how invisible I had already become. Let me tell you who I am so you understand what was at stake. My name is Garrett Ashworth. I founded Ashworth Lindsay Industrial Holdings in 1991, 2 years after Helene and I got married. With $60,000 I'd saved working as a turnaround consultant and another $40,000 my father co-signed against his retirement. We made hydraulic systems. Boring, unglamorous, the kind of business nobody writes magazine articles about. By 2008, we'd survived the recession by buying out 2 competitors who hadn't. By 2018, we were doing $220 million in annual revenue, with margins that made our private equity offers thicker every year. I am on paper worth somewhere in the high 8 figures. The company is worth more. My wife was the COO from 1994 to 2009. She knows the business. She knows the trust documents. She helped draft them. She knows that if I am declared incapacitated under the cognitive provisions we wrote into our marital trust in 2013, control of my voting shares passes to a designated guardian, and the designated guardian, by virtue of an amendment we made in 2019 after my heart scare, is her. We made that amendment because we trusted each other. I want you to understand that. There was a night after I came home from the cardiologist when she sat on the edge of the bed and held my hand and said, "If anything ever happens to you, I want to make sure nobody can come in and take what we built." And I had cried because I am not too proud to admit that I cry. And we had signed the amendment 3 weeks later. And I had never thought about it again until that afternoon at the country club when I learned that my wife had been planning for 2 years how to use it against me. The man at the bar was Dr. Linus Hargrove, my internist, the same internist who'd been treating me for 9 years, the same man who'd patted me on the shoulder at our Christmas party 2 years ago and called me his favorite stubborn patient. I didn't sleep that night. I lay next to her in the dark and listened to her breathe, and I thought about every forgotten name, every misplaced set of car keys, every "honey, are you sure you took your vitamin?" And I understood, with a clarity that scared me, that I had been gaslit so slowly and so patiently that I had begun to gaslight myself. That was the moment I stopped being sad. I want you to know exactly when. It was around 4 in the morning, with the street light coming in pale through the curtain, and I was looking at her shoulder, and I thought, she has spent 2 years rehearsing this. I have one chance to rehearse my answer. The next morning, I got up, made her coffee the way I always do, kissed the top of her head, and left for the office at 7. From the office, I called my old college roommate, a tax attorney named Webb Carrington, who'd retired 3 years ago to a fishing cabin in northern Wisconsin. I told him I needed 2 hours of his time on the phone, paid it whatever his rate had been, and I needed it that day. Webb listened to me for 46 minutes without interrupting. When I was done, he said, "Garrett, listen to me very carefully. Do not confront her. Do not change your behavior at home. Do not stop seeing Hargrove. I am calling you back in 1 hour with 3 names. You will hire all of them." The 3 names were a forensic accountant, a private investigator who specialized in domestic financial fraud, and a neurologist at the Cleveland Clinic who had testified in 24 guardianship cases and had a reputation for hating fraudulent diagnoses with the intensity of a man who'd watched his own father lose everything to one. I called the neurologist first. His name was Dr. Mile. Pradip Wessels, and he had an opening in 9 days. I took it. I want to say something here because I know how the story sounds. I know it sounds like a man who lost his mind and started spying on his wife. I want you to understand that I did not feel crazy in those 9 days. I felt the opposite of crazy. I felt for the first time in 2 years completely sane. What I had been calling stress was theft. What I had been calling forgetfulness was a campaign. The relief of finally seeing it for what it was. I could not describe that to you. It was like having a low fever for 2 years and not knowing it, and then finally taking the medicine and feeling the heat leave your body. I went to Cleveland. I told Helen I had a board retreat in Toronto. She didn't ask questions. She kissed me at the door and told me to fly safe. I flew alone. Dr. Wessels spent 6 hours with me over 2 days. He did the full battery, the Mosier, the neuropsych panel, the MRI, the blood work, the genetic markers. Then he sat across from me in his office in a cardigan that had a coffee stain on the cuff and said, "Mr. Ashworth, your cognition is in the 94th percentile for men your age. Your hippocampus is the size of a man, 15 years younger than you. Whoever told you that you have early dementia is either incompetent or lying. I'd like to know which because I take this personally." I gave him a retainer that afternoon. The forensic accountant, a woman named Quincy Alderman, who had hair the color of pewter and the manners of a federal prosecutor, went through 5 years of household financial records in 11 days. She found 3 credit cards I didn't know existed. She found a leased apartment in a building 2 miles from my office, paid for out of an LLC my wife had registered in Delaware. She found 6 wire transfers to that LLC totaling $412,000. She found, most painfully of all, a series of jewelry purchases dating back to our 29th anniversary. None of the jewelry had ever been on my wife's body. The investigator was a former FBI agent named Cleves Donaghy who looked exactly like a man whose name was Cleves Donaghy, who looked exactly like a man whose name was Cleves Donaghy. He photographed Helene and Hargrove together on 11 separate occasions over a 3-week period. He photographed them at the leased apartment. He photographed them at a hotel in Charleston, the trip she had told me I forgot. He photographed them at a small dinner at the home of one of Hargrove's medical partners, where they were introduced to other guests as a couple, by a man who had been my doctor for 9 years. I will not lie. There was a night in there, alone in a hotel room in Cleveland, when I cried for 90 minutes without stopping. I am 63 years old and I cried like a child. I'm telling you that because I don't want this to sound like the story of a man who never bled. I bled. I just bled in private, where it couldn't be used against me. The investigator also found something I had not expected. Hargrove had done this before. Not the affair, the diagnosis. 8 years earlier, in the practice he'd been part of in Hartford, Connecticut, he had been one of 2 physicians who'd signed a cognitive incapacity finding for a real estate developer named Ridgemont Callaway. Callaway had lost control of a $43 million estate. The case had been overturned 2 years later by a Yale neurologist, but by then, the assets had been moved, the trust had been restructured, and Callaway had died of a stroke before he could finish suing. The other signing physician on that case had been disciplined by the Connecticut Medical Board. Hargrove somehow had not. He had moved to Pennsylvania. He had married a hospital administrator. He had built a new practice, and he had apparently started looking for his next mark. That, by the way, is when I stopped feeling guilty. I want you to understand that too. Up until that point, in the back of my mind, there was a small voice saying, maybe she's just unhappy. Maybe she just fell out of love. Maybe what they're doing is wrong, but it isn't evil. The Callaway file killed that voice. Hargrove had a pattern. My wife had walked into that pattern with her eyes open. They were not 2 unhappy people. They were a hunter and his guide. We had 8 weeks before the anniversary party. I want to tell you about the anniversary party because it is what most of you came here for. But first I want to tell you about the 8 weeks because the 8 weeks are where the real story lives. I went to work. I made dinner reservations. I laughed at her jokes. I did the small, careful labor of a husband who was not aware that his wife is pricing his coffin. Twice a week, I drove to a storage unit I'd rented in a town 40 minutes away, where I kept a second laptop, a second phone, and a fireproof box containing the medical reports from Cleveland, the forensic accounting binder, the investigator's photographs, and the certified copies of every relevant trust document my old roommate Webb had pulled and reviewed. I labeled the box "Spare Christmas Lights." When I drove home, I drove the long way, the way I'd driven home from work for 15 years, so the GPS in my car would not show a deviation she might one day try to subpoena. I went to my appointments with Hargrove. I sat in his office, and I let him give me the cognitive screening test he'd been giving me every 6 months for the past 2 years. I deliberately scored a few points worse than my real ability. Webb told me to. If he's faking the slope, Webb said, match the slope. Let him build his lie with your help. The bigger his lie, the harder he falls when the truth lands on top of it. I want to admit something to you. The first time I deliberately gave a wrong answer on one of those tests, the words you have to recall after 5 minutes, I felt sick, not because I was lying to him, because I realized how easily I could have been lying to myself for 2 years. How thin the line is at 63 between performing decline and accepting decline. How many men my age have walked out of an office like that and gone home a little smaller than they walked in? How many wives have been waiting at the kitchen table for that smaller man to arrive? I started writing things down. Everything. Every conversation she and I had. Every phone call. Every meal. Time-stamped, dated, in a small leather notebook I kept locked in my desk at work. Webb said this would be useful. I came to suspect, over time, that it was useful for another reason. It made me real to myself. It said, every night when I locked it away, you saw what you saw. You heard what you heard. You are not the man they're trying to make you. 6 weeks in, our daughter Margot called. Helene had told her I'd been having episodes. Margot wanted to know if I was all right. I said, sweetheart, can you come to lunch with me on Saturday? Just you and me. There's something I need to tell you, and I need to tell you in person, and I need you to promise me you won't say anything to your mother. There was a long silence on the phone. Margot is 34. She is an art conservator at a museum in Philadelphia. She is, I have always believed, the best thing her mother and I ever made. She said, Dad, what's going on? I said, I love you. Just come. She came. We sat in a back booth at a diner I'd been going to since before she was born, and I told her everything. I showed her the photographs. I showed her the Cleveland report. I showed her the Callaway file. I watched my daughter's face go from confusion to disbelief to a kind of stillness I had never seen in her before, and I knew, in that stillness, that I had not lost her. Helene had been counting on losing her. Helene had been counting on losing her. Helene had been wrong. Margot reached across the table and took both of my hands. She said, Dad, what do you need me to do? I said, I need you to act normal until the party. I need you to hug your mother. I need you to laugh at her jokes. I need you to come stand next to me at the party, in the front, where everyone can see you, when I do what I'm going to do. Can you do that? She said, Daddy, I can do anything you need. She had not called me Daddy in 15 years. 2 weeks before the party, I had web file paperwork, quietly, sealed, with a sympathetic judge in a county 2 hours from where we lived. The paperwork did 3 things. It established Dr. Wessel's findings as the controlling medical record in any future capacity dispute. It froze a portion of my voting shares in a defensive trust that could not be unwound by spousal action. And it filed, under seal pending notice, a petition for divorce on grounds of fraud, with attached evidence to be unsealed at my election. Webb said, Garrett, you have 1 shot at the night of the party. After that, she'll lawyer up, and the next year of your life is going to be a war. Are you sure you want to do it that way? I said. Webb. She wanted a public husband. She's going to get a public ending. He laughed. He said, I missed you, brother. The party was at the Briarcliff. Same room I'd stood in, behind the wine grate, 8 weeks earlier. I'd insisted on it. Helene thought I'd insisted because I was sentimental. I'd insisted because I wanted Ezra Volkov to be in that room when the truth came out. I owed him that. I owe him still. There were 112 people there. Our friends, our neighbors, 3 of my board members, 2 of Helene's sisters, Hargrove and his wife. She'd insisted he and his wife come because he's family by now, and I had smiled and said, of course. Margot and her husband flew in from Philadelphia. My old roommate Webb flew in from Wisconsin, stood at the back of the room in a navy blazer that did not quite fit him anymore, holding a manila folder. Helene wore a dress the color of champagne. She looked beautiful. I want to be honest about that. She looked beautiful, and when she walked across the room toward me at the start of the evening, I felt for one last second the old reflex, the old love. 38 years of muscle memory and one quiet ache under the breastbone. I let myself feel it. Then I let it go. The toast started after the salad course. 2 of my board members spoke. Helene's sister spoke. Margot spoke, briefly, her voice steady, and only I could hear what was underneath it. Then it was my turn. I stood up. I had a glass of water in my hand, not champagne. I had decided weeks earlier that I would not toast my wife with wine. I tapped the glass with a butter knife. The room quieted. I said, thank you all for being here. 38 years is a long time. I've been thinking a lot lately about what it means to know someone for that long, about what it means to trust someone for that long, about what it means to discover, very late in the game, that the person you trusted was using your trust as a tool against you. The room got very still. I said, 8 weeks ago, I came to this club to confirm the wine for tonight. I didn't make it to the bar. A man who works here, a kind man, a decent man, who does not deserve to be named in this story without his permission, pulled me aside and asked me to listen to a conversation in the next room. The conversation was between my wife and my doctor. They were discussing how to declare me mentally incompetent so my wife could take control of my company. They had been planning it for 2 years. I have never heard 112 people inhale at the same time. It is a sound I will remember for the rest of my life. Helene was already on her feet. Her face was the white of a paper napkin. I said, Helene, sit down. You've talked enough for 2 years. It's my turn now. She sat down. I said, I have in this folder an independent neurological evaluation from the Cleveland Clinic that places my cognitive function in the 94th percentile for my age. I have also in this folder the records of a forensic accountant who has documented $412,000 in marital funds diverted to a leased apartment, jewelry never given to my wife, and an LLC registered in the state of Delaware. I have photographs taken by a private investigator over the past 3 weeks. I have a file from the Connecticut Medical Board regarding a previous patient of Dr. Hargrove's named Ridgemont Calloway. And I have, sitting in front of a judge in another county, a sealed petition for divorce on grounds of fraud. Hargrove had, by this point, started to stand, his wife, and I want you to remember this, because it is one of the only moments of grace I witnessed in the entire affair. His wife put her hand on his arm and pushed him back down into his chair. She did not look at him. She looked at me. She said, quietly, across the room, Mr. Ashworth, please continue. I said, Ma'am, I am sorry. She said, don't be. I turned back to Helene. I said, I'm not going to scream at you. I'm not going to call you names. There are people in this room who love both of us, and they don't deserve a screaming match. But I want them to know what you tried to do. I want them to know because you are going to spend the next year telling them that I was confused, that I was forgetting things, that I was not the man I used to be. You are going to take my company in front of the same people who watched me build it. You were going to do it slowly so no one would notice. Tonight is me noticing, in public, before you could start. She was crying now, real tears. I have wondered, since, how many of those tears were grief and how many were the cold understanding that her plan had ended before it began. I think probably both. I don't think people are simple, even when they're cruel. I said, I don't hate you. I want to. I'm trying. But I've loved you for 38 years, and I don't get to undo that on a Saturday night. What I do get to do is end the marriage cleanly, in front of witnesses, with my dignity intact. So that's what I'm doing. Effective tonight, I am separating from you. My attorney is at the back of this room. He has paperwork for you. You will move your things out of the house this week. You will not contest the divorce, because if you do, every document in this folder becomes a public filing and a criminal referral, and I do not want our daughter to have to read about her mother in the paper. Nod if you understand me. She nodded. I said, thank you all. I'm sorry to have done this here. I want you to know I considered every other way, and there wasn't one. Please, eat, drink. The food is paid for. The marriage is over. I am going home. Margot stood up beside me. She slipped her arm through mine. We walked out together, past Webb at the back of the room, past Ezra Volkov standing very still by the bar with a towel folded over his forearm. I stopped at the bar. I put my hand on Ezra's hand. I said, thank you. He said, sir, drive safe. That was all either of us said. It was enough. The divorce closed in 4 months uncontested. Hargrove lost his medical license 11 months after that, after the Pennsylvania board reviewed the Calloway file and the Cleveland records. He is, last I heard, selling supplements online. Helene moved to Scottsdale, where her sister lives. We have not spoken in 2 years, except through lawyers and once, very briefly, at our daughter's birthday, where we said hello and goodbye, and nothing in between. Margot still calls me daddy sometimes. Not always, but sometimes. I want to end this by saying something to the men my age who are listening. There are more of you out there than anyone wants to admit. You are sitting at kitchen tables right now wondering why you forgot the trip to Charleston, why your wife sighs when you ask the same question twice, why your doctor has been suggesting gently that you might want to start writing things down. Listen to me, write things down. Yes, but write them down in a notebook only you can find. Get a second opinion from a doctor your spouse did not pick. Pay for it in cash. Drive there alone. If your gut tells you something is wrong with the people closest to you, your gut is not paranoia. Your gut is 30, 40, 60 years of pattern recognition trying to keep you alive. Calm is not weakness. Patience is not surrender. Documentation is not betrayal. Walking out of a country club in front of 100 people with your daughter on your arm is not revenge. It is the last act of self-respect available to a man who has been quietly disappearing for 2 years and who has finally decided to be visible again. I am 65 years old now. I run my company. I see my daughter once a month. I have a small black Labrador named Pickett who sleeps on the foot of my bed. I am alone, and I am not lonely, and those are not the same word, no matter what anyone tells you. If a stranger ever whispers to you in the dark of an ordinary afternoon that you should stop and listen, stop, listen. You will not regret it. I never have. I've had 2 years now to sit with what happened in that wine alcove, and I want to tell you what I've come to understand. None of it arrived the way I expected. The first thing I learned is that betrayal does not appear out of nowhere. It is built, slowly, the way Helene and Linus Hargrove built their plan. One forgotten name at a time, one whispered concern to a daughter, one little erasure of a man who used to take up a whole room. Cause and effect. Every small lie they told set up the next one, and every small lie I let pass without questioning gave them another inch. I think about that a lot now. The fact that I helped build the box they were trying to put me in, just by being too trusting to look at it. The second thing I learned is that decency is not the same as weakness, but it can become weakness if you don't sharpen it. For 38 years, I let my decency do the thinking for me. I assumed my wife loved me because I loved her. I assumed my doctor cared about me because he laughed at my jokes. I assumed the world worked the way I wished it worked. The wine grate at the Briarcliff cured me of that, and I am not sorry it did. A man past 60 who still believes the people closest to him cannot harm him is a man who has not finished growing up. The third thing, and I want you to hear this one, is that the right kind of strength is quiet. It does not yell. It does not throw glasses. It does not threaten. It writes things down. It drives to Cleveland alone. It pays in cash. It hires Webb Carrington and Quincy Aldermain and Cleves Donaghy. It sits across from its daughter in a diner booth and tells her the truth and trusts her to be an adult. And then when the moment comes, it stands up at a 112-person dinner with a glass of water in its hand and tells the truth so cleanly that no one in the room can pretend they didn't hear. I am not a hero. I want to be clear about that. I am a man who got lucky that an old bartender I had been kind to for 20 years decided on one ordinary afternoon to be kind back. Ezra Volkov saved my life. The rest I had to save on my own. If you are 60 or 50 or 70 and something inside you has been whispering that the world has gotten quieter around you lately, listen. That whisper is not weakness. That whisper is the part of you that built whatever you built. Knocking on the door, asking to be let back in. Open the door. You will not regret it. I never have.